What is up? Welcome to another edition of the Utilization Report Debrief. I'm Marcus Grant, joined by Dwain McFarland. And Dwain, we were talking before the show. Summer has officially hit Texas. I feel like, you guys have like 2 seasons. It's like really hot or really cold. And I think you guys have entered really hot at this point, right?
Yes, we are entering the really hot. It's been really wet here, which is great, like for the lawn and everything, and for the water bill. But now, like when it's getting hot, you get all of that humidity. So yeah, yesterday I got out and did some exercise, and I was completely drenched. I got back, and my wife literally just threw up the "Go take a shower immediately, get away from me. Don't come within 5 feet of me." So, but when I do that, I like to act like I'm going to hug her and my daughter,
Of
and
course.
and then they run, well, let's not lie. They just run away from me anyway. So.
But now they have extra reason to. Yeah.
Yes.
We have the opposite phenomenon here in LA where it's just cloudy and cold and like it's just very un-LA like for a couple of months. We haven't seen the sun consistently since probably the middle of May. But then we'll get to July and it'll be just hot from July till probably early October. So what you guys have is coming our way, minus the humidity. But we'll see plenty of sun out here. So looking forward to that. Looking forward to diving into today's show. We are going through the ADP grid that you can find on fantasylife.com. Go over, check it out. Just kind of how guys stack up. Instead of just looking at a straight up list, you can sort of look at how the board itself shakes out. And it is in a snake format. So you have the 1.01 at the front, or at least the projected 1.01 at the front. And then it'll kind of scroll through back and forth. Like you would in a normal snake draft. So kind of easy to lay out. It's color-coded by position and that whole thing. So we're going to go through the first 10 rounds of this board, and we're going to talk about guys that are our favorite and least favorite picks in this first round, or in these first 10 rounds, rather. So let's get started. In round one, for you, your favorite, your least favorite pick on this board in round one.
Yeah, and I'll just start like with an overview. I mean, obviously it's round one. There's a ton of studs right here. There's a lot of guys that we like. So like we can caveat that. And as we go through these, we'll talk about really what the strengths are, right, in these rounds. But in round one, you really get a little bit of everything. Obviously there's no quarterbacks going in this round. It's all wide receivers, all running backs, no Travis Kelce this year. So that is something different if you haven't started drafting yet or really looking at which players are going where. For the last couple of years, we've had Kelce up there in that top round. So no tight ends this year. But yeah, for me, Marcus, my favorite player on the board, and again, this comes down to average draft position, to where they're being drafted and the player. But being able to get Breece Hall at pick 8, I just think, is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, we are talking about the running back that if I had to pick, if you came to me and you said, you got to put your mortgage on it, Dwain, who is the one player that if everything goes right for them this year, they're going to challenge Christian McCaffrey for being that running back one. I would say that it's Breece Hall, and it's just because he's got that complete skill set, right? This is a guy that missed tackles forced after attempt, yards after contact, explosive playmaking, all there. He's going to be another year removed from that brutal knee injury that ended, his rookie season early after we all got so excited about him. But it's his involvement in the passing game, Marcus. I mean, a 16% target share last year, 27% targets per route run. I mean, that's absolutely elite. So a guy that can get it done on the ground, can get it done in the passing game. And really, we have questions outside of Garrett Wilson around who's really going to be the next person in the passing game. Mike Williams coming off of an injury. Malachi Corley's a nice little draft pick, but they've already talked about how a lot of that's got to come through scheme. And then you look at Tyler Conklin. There's a little bit of noise about him maybe being an undervalued tight end in fantasy right now. But none of those other guys really stand out as being this huge target earner. And that's the kind of environment that can help a player like Breece Hall suddenly get even more receptions than what we think. So Breece Hall is that guy for me that I won't be surprised at all, Marcus, if he's the running back one overall.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely within the realm of possibility. I mean, I think he and Bijan are the guys that are really knocking on the door of taking over that opportunity. The guy that I love at the in the first round, it's probably the guy at the tail end of the first round. It's Jahmyr Gibbs for similar reasons. Now, admittedly, he is going to have to split opportunities with David Montgomery, who was very effective last year in Detroit. But we saw when Montgomery was hurt, Gibbs get a full workload and really excel in that opportunity. And I think that alone is going to be worth him getting more chances in 2024. I know the Lions say they certainly want to be a little bit more pass heavy than they were in the past seasons. That means more targets potentially for Jahmyr Gibbs. It's a very high-powered offense. It's going to move the football. They're going to score points. And I just look, if you are getting him at that spot, right? If you're getting him in that last pick of the first round, you also get another pick right there on the turn. So it allows you to be a little bit more strategic with what you want to do. If you decide you say want to go running back, or if you in turn want to turn around and get a wide receiver or somebody like that, I do just kind of like that flexibility of having Jahmyr Gibbs right there.
Yeah, for sure. And notice we both talk about backs, and Bijan fits into this mold as well. But if you're taking him back in round one, you want guys, have a real opportunity to be majorly involved in the passing game. And all of these guys are plus players coming out of the backfield. Breece just happened to be the top guy out of these three, but that could flip this year, easily go to either Bijan. It could go to Jahmyr Gibbs. So I do think this is a year where you've got 4 true elite potential running backs, and they all 4 go in round one like they should. So Marcus, let's talk a little bit about the player that maybe scares us the most, clicking on their name. And this feels so weird to say this name, I have to say. But for me, it is Justin Jefferson. And it's not that I'm not willing to take Justin Jefferson in round one of, a fantasy draft, because I am. But my issue is that right now he's going at pick 5. Mm-hmm. And I know he's going to have a rookie quarterback under center, or a backup that we don't really, want to have under center. Now, Nick Mullins last year did a nice job, and he's historically been a guy that can throw for that 250, 275 yards. Doesn't throw as many touchdowns as Kirk Cousins, but we knew that the yardage would probably be there. But we don't know that with JJ McCarthy. And at some point, whether it's the first game of the season or it's the 6th game of the season, JJ McCarthy's going under center. And if we go back and we look at the history of draft picks between pick 1 and pick 16, so this is me including guys that went first overall in the same group, we're probably looking at a 50 to 75 yard downturn in passing yards per game for the Vikings based on historical evidence. Now, I know some people are like, oh, no, I don't care. It's Kevin O'Connell. I'm just going to go with it. I feel like we're kind of getting ourselves out on a limb. And I'm still willing to take Justin Jefferson towards the end of the first round, but I don't want to take him over Bijan. I don't want to take him over Breece Hall. I'm not taking him over Amon-Ra St. Brown. So I've got him ranked right now as the number 8 player on my board. Mm-hmm. So I don't get a lot of Justin Jefferson. Still, guys, love the player. Absolutely glad he got paid. I think he's the best receiver in the NFL. But if you're in an offense that throws for 200 to 225 yards per game, it's going to be really hard for you to uncork a wide receiver 1 overall finish.
Yeah, I think it's a pure case of love the player, hate the ADP right now, because I'm exactly with you on that. Just the quarterback situation there scares me. He's going to be the guy to get the targets. And I think, and what is worse, it sort of trickles down, because if we're worried about Justin Jefferson at his current ADP, then, how worried are we going to be about Jordan Addison? How worried are we going to be, not that Aaron Jones is a huge pass catcher, but what does that mean for him as well? So if we are worried about where Jefferson's going, and we're worried about the quarterback situation being able to support multiple pass catchers, everybody in that Vikings offense takes a hit. But I'm with you. He's the guy that I've probably clicked on the least, just because I'm generally not in a position to get him. He's not going to last to a spot where I'm comfortable drafting him. And if I'm up higher, chances are I'm drafting somebody
I've drafted 81 teams, Marcus. I've got Jefferson, I think, once.
Wow.
And it was when he fell to me at like 9.
Wow.
So it's just the other day he fell to me at 8, but Breece Hall was still there. And I'm just like, I'm taking Breece Hall, man. Breece Hall could score 400 points this year. I don't think that's in the range of outcomes for Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, no, 100%. All right. So that's round 1. Let's move on to round 2, and your favorite guy, another running back that you like in this round.
Yeah, it's Dwain Achane, and I know he's been falling down boards a little bit here lately, ever since the NFL draft. But look, we've just seen the ceiling for Achane, and it's just too high, Marcus. And our ability to decipher coach speak is not good. As good as the Coach Speak Index is, and you guys should all be following Coach Speak Index. Like, if you're just really looking to be able to weed through all of these different comments and everything from the coaches, and we're trying to read the tea leaves. But overall, like, I've studied this stuff, like how sticky really are coaching tendencies year over year. And a lot of it typically comes back to their personnel and who they've got available. So I think everybody's assuming that Achane's going to be stuck in like this 35-40% role. And here's the thing. If that's the role he's in, I think he can still pay off this ADP. But what if we're wrong, Marcus? And by like week 3 or 4, he's getting 55% of the snaps. he would suddenly be now in the conversation. If we knew that was going to happen today, we would be drafting him where Jahmyr Gibbs is going, because he's the same kind of profile as Jahmyr Gibbs. You're getting it around later. I just swing for upside when I see a player like Achane in an offense that I love. I'm just not going to back off. And again, I don't think the floor is as bad as some people think, just because we've already seen what he can do in a part-time role. Obviously, efficiency is going to come down, and we wouldn't expect all of that to stay the same, but I still just love Achane. And I think people are just kind of dismissing the fact that he could be in a larger role than last year. And I think we've got to be open to that.
Yeah, and I think I would say that's one of my just not concerns, but certainly thought processes, right? Is what is going to be the workload there? The Dolphins do seem like they're still committed in some way to Raheem Mostert, but Mostert coming off what was a magical season that it feels like going to be hard for him to duplicate. If Achane can stay healthy and if he can get a larger share of the work, then the sky really is the limit for him right there. No doubt about it. I love Brandon Ayuk at this spot. I love him especially because of the wide receivers that are kind of going around him. I mean, look, I get it. Chris Olave is incredibly talented. I have major concerns about Derek Carr, Devontae Adams, sort of same thing with Gardner Minshew at quarterback. I mean, Debo's right there, but Brandon Ayuk has sort of proven he's the number one wide receiver there in San Francisco. So where he's going right now, knowing the way they've used him in that offense the last few years and just seeing how he has grown, and even going back to the Super Bowl where he was kind of the one guy in that offense that could consistently kind of get open on his own. Then the Chiefs decided, well, we're just going to take him away. And then you saw the offense kind of struggle the rest of the day from there. I just love getting him in that spot, sort of middle of the second round, especially if I go with a running back in the first round. Ayuk is kind of sitting right there as the wide receiver one. I've been hammering him, I think, in a lot of drafts so far this offseason.
Yeah, I think with Ayuk, he's one of these guys, there's no doubt, like, the talent is there. I think all of us acknowledge, like, if suddenly Brandon Ayuk were teleported to the Bills roster, we would think of him as an absolute alpha wide receiver one. All the underlying traits are there. I haven't been as bullish on him as you. Again, it's like Justin Jefferson. I love the player. I love Brandon Ayuk, but I still know that Deebo Samuel's there, and he gets more schemed up looks than what Brandon Ayuk does. So I do think in a vacuum, Brandon Ayuk, if you were starting an NFL team today and you had to pick between Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel, I'm taking Ayuk. But in fantasy, I think there's still potentially an argument for Deebo because he gets the schemed up work and he gets carries in the run game. Like, their target shares are similar, but he gets these other additional touches that really Shanahan wants to make sure that he gets. So I like both of those players. I just kind of mix them in. I haven't been overboard. But I'll tell you a guy that I'm really not happy about drafting right now. Okay. And I've avoided him pretty much every draft. It's just Saquon Barkley. Barkley's efficiency, all of his data points have gone down. Now, we've talked all throughout the offseason how efficiency can really be this overrated thing. But Saquon's at his best whenever he's really involved in the pass game, Marcus. And I think there's a major risk to this. And the offseason research that I did showed that when a really good running back changes teams, so a good running back being qualified as a guy that's used to getting a lot of volume, right? And a team is invested a high pick. So that's Saquon Barkley. Josh Jacobs fits that. Derrick Henry fits that. But looking at Barkley, he was always very involved in the passing game for the Giants, but they've also never had a lot of wide receivers. So now you move over to Philadelphia. Jalen Hurts is going to scramble more. We know that. I think that can be a little bit overrated for a good passing down back like we've seen Saquon be able to be. But then you got to deal with A.J. Brown. You got to deal with the fact you got Devonta Smith. And you got Dallas Goedert, who still needs to get his targets as well. And then when you add in the fact that, yeah, maybe they don't push quite as often with Jalen Hurts, but they're still going to do it, Marcus. So I struggle to see that ceiling case for Saquon Barkley that makes me want to take him over some of the wide receivers, especially knowing I can turn around and get a Josh Jacobs in round 4 instead of in round 2. The Packers were a good offense last year. So it's the other kind of thing that I look at and I'm like, well, if I pass on a running back here, can I get another running back I feel similarly about a few rounds later? And the answer with Saquon is yes.
Yeah, no, I totally get that there. I don't know how much I've drafted Saquon, kind of for a lot of those reasons. I mean, what helped him in New York was the fact that he was the centerpiece of the offense. That's not going to be asked of him in Philadelphia because they just don't need him to be. He can be kind of a nice piece, but he doesn't have to be the driving engine of that whole thing. I'm concerned about Nico Collins. Again, this is, we keep saying this, right? It's like Jefferson. It's sort of like Ayuk. It's not about who the player is. It's just about the situation there. And knowing that, Tank Dell is looking like he's going to be ready maybe for week 1. Stephon Diggs, who I think there is an avenue where he sort of goes on his supervillain arc, right? And is out to this year at least prove to the world and specifically to the Buffalo Bills that they made a mistake by parting ways with him. It's mitigated, admittedly, somewhat by this being best ball, right? Where you don't necessarily have to guess on a week-to-week basis what the Nico Collins weeks are going to be. But I think it's just naturally sort of going to take some opportunities away from him, having Diggs there, still having to share opportunities with Tank Dell. I don't know how necessarily Joe Mixon factors into the passing game. Dalton Schultz also still there to get some targets there. So my just concern with Nico Collins is more about where he's coming off the board in relation to, the guys around him. You talk about it with Saquon Barkley. Is there somebody I can get who's going to give me maybe similar production a few rounds later? And I think for Nico Collins, I think the answer is yes. I think there's a litany of guys that can give you something akin to what Collins potentially can give you, maybe not at that draft price.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point with the Texans. Ultimately, we don't even know who the number one guy is in the offense. Yeah. I mean, it could be Tank Dell. Mm-hmm. Like Tank Dell was really, as much as I love Nico Collins, and he was a guy that we really pumped up last year. So hopefully people got to draft him a lot. So we're Nico homers. Tank Dell was honestly the more impressive player overall last season. And that's not to take anything away from Nico because he was great as well. So I feel you. I'm still drafting Nico quite a bit. I kind of put him in the same bucket as Brandon Ayuk, to be honest. I think we know more about Ayuk, his talent profile. We're more certain of it. But again, it's just a crowded offense that should be really good. So I kind of put him in that same bucket. I've been taking Nico, but I like building out some of those Houston stacks. But man, looking over at, the next round, like we move to round 3, that's where it really starts to get interesting for me. I think round 2 is pretty flat as well. And then in round 3, I'll be honest, like the name that I've been gravitating to more and more towards the middle and later in the round, Marcus, is Josh Allen. Just because you start getting to these names where, I like Michael Pittman, but he's a possession receiver. I like Cooper Kupp, but he's getting older. I like Malik Neighbors, but he's still a rookie on an offense that I'm just not quite sure about. Or I can take Josh Allen, who last year, even when the Bills decided, we're just going to be this run-heavy team, we're not even going to throw it that much, his fantasy points didn't go away. Why? Because he's such a major part of the run game. So I just feel like he's so insulated. If Joe Brady decides they want to run it back and be more conservative on offense because they don't have a Stephon Diggs and maybe some of these young receivers don't come along, then they can do that. But let's say the young receivers do evolve and they start just taking steps forward. Maybe Curtis Samuel unlocks a level that we haven't seen in the past. Dalton Kincaid takes a step forward. Now suddenly it can be a pass-heavy offense. So there's just so many ways for Josh Allen, honestly, to cover his bases. He's the top-scoring quarterback 4 years straight. So even if you don't want to listen to any of my nerd speak, it's just like, hey, he's good. He's good. And the reason why is because he can do everything. So Josh Allen is one of these guys, once I get into the later part or middle part of round 3, and I start looking at the questions around some of these other players, I'm like, you know what? I know what I'm getting in Josh Allen, even if this offense changes. And the other nice thing, Marcus, is because no one is certain about who's going to be, his top options in the offense, you can still add all of them and stack them up with him in the following rounds. You want Dalton Kincaid? Fine. You get him in round 4 or 5. You want James Cook? Round 4 or 5. You want Keon Coleman? Round 7. You want Curtis Samuel? Round 8, round 9. You want Khalil Shakir? You can do that in round 10. So just a lot of flexibility. And you don't have to try to get all of those, but you can come away with 2 of them very easily.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's about the time. I mean, I've gotten Josh Allen a little bit, not a ton, but it is about the time when I'm like, okay, now I'm ready to at least consider a quarterback at that spot. And if you're going to do it, why not get the guy who's given you the most consistency over the last 4 years or so? I like Devonta Smith in this situation. And it's for me a deal where I love AJ Brown, but if I can get similar production to AJ Brown from the same offense 20 picks later, I'm probably going to lean that way. I mean, I have been kind of surprised that you haven't seen their ADPs get a little bit closer than they are. Maybe it's just because there are a whole lot of other names that people sort of like in between them. But again,
it could happen though. It started to happen with Jalen Waddle and Tyreek.
Yeah. So maybe it does.
I think you could see Devonta rise.
But right now, yeah, I mean, where he is, I'm willing to take him because, chances are I'm not getting AJ Brown in the first round, but I can sort of get, AJ Brown 2.0. I don't even know, is he 1.1? I have no idea how you would label him, but whatever it is, I can get him in the third round and still feel confident that I have a piece of the Eagles offense. I have a guy who's going to, have a large target share and be incredibly productive, and feel pretty good about my opportunities right there. So I was surprised to see the name you don't like, though, here in the third round.
Yeah. Again, this is definitely an ADP thing. And what can I get in the following rounds that would be similar to this? And it is Sam Laporta. As much as I love Sam Laporta, we were on the Sam Laporta train as a rookie. Yes, guys, you can go back and check the film. You can watch it. I know a lot of people now, we said we really did say we like Sam Laporta, and we said that one of these rookies was going to be big. And Laporta was the guy that we talked about a lot last year. But the challenge is I can turn around in round 4, Marcus, and I can get Trey McBride. In round 5, I can get Dalton Kincaid. Round 5, I can get Mark Andrews. Travis Kelce is going in round 4. And so that's like tight end quarterback alley, round 4 and 5. I really think if you're building out your draft and you're thinking zoom out right now, the way ADP is working, and Jonathan Fuller alluded to this a few weeks back when he came on, and we talked a lot about best ball strategy and where the strengths and like the pockets of like sweetness are in these drafts. Round 4 and 5 for quarterbacks and tight ends is amazing. And the problem I run into is I like Sam Laporta, but when I take him in round 3, then I get to round 4 and round 5, and the best value on the board is a tight end. And I feel like I can't take it, Marcus. And I've kind of blocked myself off from like that value proposition, filling in a spot that like I really need on my team. Now, I don't mind taking 2 elite tight ends here and there, but that's not a strategy I want to be deploying all the time in my best ball draft. So Laporta is really, it's more he's a victim of circumstance. It's nothing to do with him. It's to do with where he goes versus where these other guys go that I also feel really good about. And I just know every time I get him, I'm sitting there and there's Mark Andrews falling all the way down to me in round 5. And I'm like, dadgummit, I already have Laporta and I could be getting Mark Andrews. And I think you can flip a coin on which one's going to be the better tight end this year. I really think you can do that. Like I give a slight edge to Laporta. I'm fine with him being the first tight end, but it's pretty close between him, Mark Andrews, Dalton Kincaid, Trey McBride, all those guys. Yeah,
I do think we have kind of a tightening of the group at the top of the tight end rankings right now. One, we're at a point where Travis Kelce is not the undisputed tight end 1 anymore. But you mentioned Laporta, Andrews, Trey McBride, all these other guys that are getting a whole lot of love at the top of the rankings. And so you do have options to choose from if you are somebody who decides to go tight end fairly early there. You mentioned Malik Neighbors and sort of the concerns you have for him. That's why he's probably the guy that I've clicked on maybe the least of anybody in this round. I'll say, though, so I'll ask you this. Do you think people are already approaching Malik Neighbors with the impression that Darren Waller is retired? I know he hasn't officially said anything yet, but it seems like it's been trending this way. And I just wonder if you feel like people are already sort of decided that when they are making the Malik Neighbors call.
I think they're probably middling it a little bit, but I think people are also just so burned out on Darren Waller, they don't care. They're just like, you're hurt all the time. Yes, you were a good player at one time, but now also you're dragging all this out and you're posting videos, right. With you and your auto tuner on your voice. I mean, that auto tuner was getting exhausted. Darren, you were exhausting the auto tuner. It may have broke. But I think they're probably middling it. I could see once Waller says he's out, maybe Neighbors climbs a little bit. And if he says he's back, maybe he falls a little bit, but I don't know, Marcus. I don't know that there would be much change at all. I think that everyone would still clearly expect Malik Neighbors to be the focal point of the entire Giants offense.
Yeah. I mean, and I guess that's probably fair. I guess, again, we sort of just have the concerns about what the offense is going to be. I mean, we kind of know who Daniel Jones is. I don't know if Drew Lock is a potentially better option and how much significantly better he would be than Daniel Jones there. So Neighbors, I think, comes with a calculated risk there. But, I've seen him falling a little bit, in which case I'm more willing to take the shot on him. In fact, I just had a draft where I was able to get him somewhere in the middle of round 4. I was like, okay, I feel a little bit better about that. I'm willing to take that shot than if I had to do it somewhere, early to middle part of round 3. Speaking of round 4, George Pickens he's growing in popularity. And Dwain, I guess one of the arguments for him is that, well, who else is there for them to throw the ball to in Pittsburgh?
Yeah, when you look at it last year, 26% targets per route run without Deontay Johnson. Actually, that's the last 2 seasons without Deontay Johnson on the field. Well, that's a wide receiver 1 profile. And the nice thing about George Pickens that we saw last year while Deontay Johnson was out is they actually said, hey, we're going to let you run basically a full route tree. We're going to let you run some of these in-breaking routes. We're not just going to send you on a go all the time. And then you look at the other moves they made in the offseason. Obviously, you bring in Roman Wilson, in the draft. Like, he's a vertical slot. You've got Pat Freiermuth, who should be healthier this season, really more of a possession underneath tight end guy. So I think he's just in a spot now, Marcus, where he's going to get that full route tree. I think it's an opportunity. He's already shown he can earn the targets, and we know he can come up with big plays. He can come up with these plays down the field. So this is a guy that, against man coverage, also a 26% targets per route run, not quite to the elite level of 30%, which is what we want for the very top guys, but knocking on the door of that. And then he had that 2.11 yards per route run. So when I look at George Pickens, I feel like he's a guy that could easily be in the top 12 fantasy wide receivers this season. And you're getting to draft him more like a low end wide receiver 2 to high end wide receiver 3, depending on the draft you're in. So yeah, man, I just absolutely love taking George Pickens.
Yeah, George Pickens is a fun one to click on in that spot. We're talking about tight ends, and you mentioned how you were just concerned about taking Laporta because other guys are available later. That's why I love Trey McBride in this situation there. Like, if he's still there, which he generally is, I've been clicking on him a ton because Marvin Harrison, most likely going to be Harrison Jr., I should say, most likely the number one target, but Trey McBride shouldn't be too far behind in terms of the opportunities he gets there in Arizona. We saw what he was able to do to the point that he made Zach Ertz expendable, that they sent him on his way and really gave the entire job to McBride. So I don't see anything really changing in that arena. It's going to be him and MHJ getting most of the work there. So I'm totally fine with taking Trey McBride right there in the 4th round. Who don't you like in this round?
And this is more of a positional thing, but I don't really like taking Pacheco in round 4. Like, he's creeped up. I was taking him a little bit more, Marcus, when he was in round 5, but it's just so hard because, again, like, you scroll down the board, you're like, I can take Pacheco here. I can get Rachaad White at the end of round 5, Joe Mixon at the end of round 5. I can get Aaron Jones, 2 rounds later, David Montgomery 2 rounds later, Ramondre Stevenson, Zamir White. I just feel like the distance, like, on some of these guys, I'm not that confident. I obviously want to be invested in the Chiefs offense, and we feel really good about where it's going to go. So I'm not saying Pacheco is going to be a bad pick, but when I look down the board, I'm like, man, a lot of these receivers, if I don't take one now or I don't get an elite tight end, I can't get one later, but I can probably find another Isaiah Pacheco, or late in the season, hit on the waiver wire, or in best ball cases, right, you're stocking up on some of these younger rookies that will find their way into the lineup as the season goes. So I feel like there's just more ways for me to offset not taking Pacheco there versus having to try to offset making it up at wide receiver, tight end, and the elite quarterback later, because I don't feel as strongly about those spots as the draft goes on.
Yeah. I get you on Pacheco because he's a guy that I think we sort of like, but you're right. There are other options that I think are similar in production potential that you can find later on in the draft. I know you mentioned you like taking Josh Jacobs, and I like Josh Jacobs in general. I think lately I've sort of been spooked by all this talk that maybe Marshawn Lloyd gets a bigger opportunity in Green Bay than we initially anticipated. And that sort of has me like, well, maybe I should back off of him just a little bit. I think if, all things were status quo, if we were sort of assured that they were going to use him the way the Raiders have used him the last couple of years, I'm totally fine taking him there. I just am starting to worry, and maybe this is me reading into coach speak maybe a little bit too much, but that maybe the Packers aren't going to lean on him the way the Raiders did, and that Marshawn Lloyd could get some touches. And for that reason, maybe the ADP is a little bit higher than I'm comfortable with right now.
Yeah, and I think you have to listen to the coach speak because historically we have got a coaching staff that has shown they are willing to rotate backs, and not just any backs, really good backs. Mm-hmm. And I don't even know that we can say Josh Jacobs is a really good back. He honestly was average to below average in all the metrics we care about. Now, they paid him, so he's a running back one from that standpoint, but that doesn't always work out. And they did spend the 4th round pick on Marshawn Lloyd, and he is a different style back. So it would make sense to mix these guys. So I think once you put the complete picture together, you're right. I think we should be more skeptical about Josh Jacobs. The thing is, I wasn't drafting him at all in round 3, but I have slowly been tacking him on to teams as he falls down these boards, just in case that reverses at any point. And then it's like, okay, great. I got some exposure to Josh Jacobs whenever he was going in round 4. Now he's back to going at the end of round 3, and I won't take him anymore. So I'm also like thinking from a portfolio standpoint, but if we're just going pure, do we like the running back in that range? I think you can apply the same thing to him that we just talked about with Pacheco, which is, there are guys going later that are pretty similar to him versus if I pass on these receivers, elite tight ends and quarterbacks, it's harder to find that. It's harder to replace that later in a draft.
Basketball fans, the finals are almost here. We've seen it all this season. Rookies rising to the top, legends leaving their legacy on the court, and there are just a few games left to get in on the action. Right now, you can get in on the action with DraftKings Pick 6, a brand new way to play daily fantasy sports. All new customers who play $5 will get $50 in Pick 6 credits. Getting started is simple. Just download the DraftKings Pick 6 app and sign up with our promo code DEBRIEF. Pick at least 2 players and choose if they'll have more or less of a stat, like will they score more or less than 30 points, or have more or less than 8 assists. Lock them in and compete against others for a shot at huge cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Pick 6 app now and sign up with our code DEBRIEF. Only on DraftKings Pick 6, the crown is yours. All right, so that gets us to round 5, and you sort of clued us into who you really like. You talked about not taking Sam Laporta in round 3 because Mark Andrews might be there in round 5. So I'll let you elaborate, though, on why you like Mark Andrews there.
Yeah, and you can throw Dalton Kincaid into this mix as well. I look, almost 70% of my teams have an elite tight end, meaning I've taken a quarterback by the time I get to round 6. So I included Kyle Pitts in this. I know you guys, he's gonna have to prove these an elite tight end. The underlying metrics say it, but you wanna spit on that and poo-poo it. Fine. I can't really argue with you. Pitts still ultimately has to put it all together and give us a big fantasy season. But if I use Pitts as the cutoff, and you could even go one more with George Kittle, I mean, 70% of the time I've got one of these tight ends on my roster, and more often than not, my cutoff is Andrews and Dalton Kincaid. So I think I was at a little under 60% on using them as the cutoff. I just think they're an advantage, Marcus. I look at taking, Mark Andrews versus some of the wide receivers and running backs in that range. And again, looking at, what happens to the tight end board as we go further down the draft, I just don't feel as confident. But Mark Andrews is just a guy that still a very strong target earner. I know we've got Zay Flowers in the mix, but there's a chance for it to really be a really condensed offense. We don't know. We haven't really seen anything about out of Rashad Bateman to this point in his career. He's had some small flashes, but I think he's got to prove it at this point. Like, I can't worry about him. Like, it's going to be Mark Andrews and Zay Flowers until proven otherwise. And Mark Andrews is just playing on a great offense. So, like, there's just this opportunity for him to score 10 receiving touchdowns, come up with 1,000 yards, and, have 75 to 85 catches. That's just really hard to pass up at a tight end spot. And he could easily be the tight end 1 overall. Again, I think that this group of guys, you mentioned them, they are ranking higher. Drafters are being more aggressive with them. But I think it's hard to decipher for sure which one is going to be the top one. And Andrews is one of the last ones coming off the board. So I just like getting him basically almost 2 rounds later than what you get Sam Laporta. And I think you're getting a very similar asset.
I mean, I think even with all the shuffling of pieces and drafting that the Ravens have done at wide receiver, none of those guys, I feel like, eclipses what Mark Andrews' target share is going to be when he's healthy and on the field for sure. Round 5, I mentioned, round 3, I can start thinking about a quarterback. If I haven't done that, round 5 seems like a good spot to get one. And Anthony Richardson, more often than not, seems to be sitting right there. He is, I guess he's BSOHL, I guess the biggest shape of his life now. He's up to like 255. I mean, that's monstrous. Huge. Right. He's already big. That's even bigger now. They're going to have him in that backfield with a healthy Jonathan Taylor. And so now if you're a defender, you got to kind of pick your poison on who's going to be running the football there. We saw, Dwayne, that they were already very excited and very willing to use him down near the goal line to score those short yardage touchdowns. He's put on weight. He's gotten even bigger. He says he's not going to change his playing style. We already love the upside, even in what was a relatively small sample size in the NFL. People are still very excited about him. I'm very excited about him. I have no problem taking him in the 5th round with the potential to be a top 5. I think Field Yates, that tweeted a couple days ago that just on his running stats alone last year, he was still like would have been like the 15th running back or something like that. It was something kind of ridiculous with what he did in that very small sample size. So I'm very excited to draft Anthony Richardson right here.
Yeah, 18% of his team's designed rushing attempts in the games that he started, but he had 2 of those games where he got knocked out. So that number would be closer to probably where we had Jalen Hurts at 24%, which led the league last year. And I think that's what you're getting with Richardson, another guy that can be in that 22 to 25% of the team's design run game. I think he could poach a lot of touchdowns down inside the 5. And he has some growth, concerns in the passing game. Like he's going to have to get better there, but they've got Josh Downs, who they added last season. And then this year they go back to the well with Adonai Mitchell. Supermodel didn't like him as a round 1 pick, but they get him in round 2 as a field stretcher, really get to draft him more on those raw traits. And that's something that can help because Alec Pierce just hasn't been able to do much with that role. So I think there is an opportunity for more in the passing game. But I'm with you. Like Richardson is just one of these guys. He's got that dual threat elite upside, and it would not surprise me at all if he's the QB1 overall this season.
Yeah, no doubt. We have the same guy that we don't like for this.
This is sad.
It is a sad
day, really.
It hurts my heart. I hate saying this. I love Keenan Allen, but I don't know. I mean, Keenan Allen it just is an unfortunate circumstance. It's great for the Bears, right? They've got talented wide receiver. It is great for the Bears. It's just a bad situation for fantasy, Dwayne.
Yeah, and we touched on this a little bit last week, but the concern is like when the Bears go to their 2 wide receiver sets, what they're going to do with Shane Waldron, like he's just shown that he's going to do that. Even last year when he had Jackson Smith and Jigba as a first-round pick they invested in Seattle, like they were one of the lowest 11 personnel teams. Not lowest, but they were below the league average. So we either need to hear some things in camp that they're going to be using 3 wide receivers more, or we need to hear for certain that Keenan Allen is going to be the guy that's on the field in those 2 wide receiver sets. I'm leaning more and more to that being Rome Odunze, and it's just enough to get me scared because it's age 32 season, coming on for Keenan. Now, he's not shown really signs of losing his target earning ability, 32% target share last year. So Keenan could very much make us very sorry for this. This, you can also argue this is all baked into his current ADP. Like this is a guy that was a top 12 fantasy wide receiver last season. And right now you're able to get Keenan Allen, at the 52nd pick, so, I mean, he's coming off the board as the wide receiver 31. So I don't want to overstate these things because I still will click on him occasionally, but he's just a name that I honestly thought I would have more by now in my drafts. And I just don't take him very much. It sounds weird, but I'm more willing to click on Odunze around later than I am Keenan in that range. And there's also opportunity costs, right? I'm having to pass. If to take Keenan, I might have to pass Mark Andrews, which I'm just not going to do. Or I maybe already set up the Texans wide receiver stack and I'm looking at CJ Stroud. Or I want to make sure I tack on the elite quarterback, and the guy you just named, Anthony Richardson, is staring me in the face. So that also has something to do with it. Once you get to, like, if you put Keenan in the next round of wide receivers, I would have a much easier time clicking on his name. But when you put him in the round that he's going in, because those elite tight ends and quarterbacks are sitting there, I just get the opportunity costs are also high.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on all of that. Plus, the track record of older receivers changing teams, going to a new offense has generally not been great, and that very much applies to Keenan Allen now in Chicago. I also just throw in the fact that, look, as much as I am excited about Caleb Williams and what he can be, look, the idea that he can support 3 receivers at a very high level is very, very concerning to me. Round 6, you want pieces of the Chiefs offense. You got yourself a very speedy piece of the Chiefs offense right now.
Yeah, Xavier Worthy slipped into round 6, folks. Pete Overzet be damned. Like he's trying, Pete had this thing on a train to where we might be getting into round 4. And now the tide has kind of shifted back the other way. And I think some of it comes back to Hollywood Brown, how Patrick Mahomes has talked about Brown in the press and knowing that he's a guy that when he's been healthy, which he hasn't been for the last 2 years, can still be a good wide receiver. And so I think there's just enough of that's pushing Xavier Worthy down. But look, this is a guy in the supermodel that graded out great against man coverage, graded out good against zone coverage. Matt Harmon did note that he has some issues with that press man coverage, but I trust Andy Reid to be creative with a player like this. And I think once you get him moving, he's shown that he can beat man coverage. He's already done that in college. So to your point, you get a piece of the Chiefs offense, and I want rookies for that stretch run. I want guys that are going to be coming on at the end of the year if I'm trying to win a big best ball tournament. And it's just hard for me to find a better way to do that than getting in on a first round wide receiver that lands with the Kansas City Chiefs that has absolute elite speed.
100% totally down with that. For me, and we couldn't do a show without throwing Kyle Pitts out here, right? We just have to. If I'm not
glad you did it though instead of me, because I feel
fine.
like it always
I'm willing to take the shots. That's fine. If I'm not getting Trey McBride in round 4, then I'm going to try and get Kyle Pitts somewhere in round 6. I mean, this is the perfect storm of situation, right? He no longer has a coach that's going to use him in bizarre ways. He's got an upgraded quarterback. He is healthy. These are all things that we have wanted for him. They're all coming together. They're all coalescing. And so I still believe, I know a lot of us still believe, I guess a lot of us never stopped. It was like Journey. Don't stop believing. So I'm still in on Kyle Pitts in round 6. I will say if it doesn't happen this year, then maybe it never happens, but I'm willing to put a chip on it right now. We both have the same guy in round 5. We both have the same guy in round 6, Jordan Addison. I mean, Dwayne, if we're concerned about Justin Jefferson, how can we not be concerned about Jordan Addison a few rounds later?
Right. And obviously Addison, like, his price down from there, and he had a solid rookie season. So I don't want to be completely out on Addison, but right now I'm just so much more comfortable, Marcus, clicking on Chris Godwin. You got Ladd McConkey, Keon Coleman, all these guys going in that range. So I think Addison's, like, it's not that he's priced terrible, but again, if the passing offense, which more likely than not is going to be somewhere around that 225 yards per game mark, it's going to be tough for Jordan Addison because Justin Jefferson's going to eat. You might get a little more early in the season because, we won't have TJ Hawkinson until maybe around midseason. Then it's going to take him time to get back going. So that's the positive for him, is that the fact that we're going to be waiting on Hawkinson. There's a chance Hawkinson's not right all season, and really Addison is the number 2. But you need the upside. You're going to need JJ McCarthy to outkick, like, expectations in order to really still get that payoff on Jordan Addison. So yeah, he's a guy that, look, solid target earner as a rookie, good profile. I still think he's an ascending player, but I think it might be another year before we really see him in a situation where we want him on our fantasy squads.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's less about him. It's especially about the names around him. You mentioned clicking on Chris Godwin. Ladd McConkey is a name I love in this round as well. So over to round 7. And we talked about the Panthers and how I think everybody's starting to clue in on the Panthers, but still a pretty good ADP on Deontay Johnson right now.
Yeah, this is look, and people hear me talk about Deontay Johnson every year, so I was glad I didn't. That's why I couldn't talk about Kyle Pitts as well, because I knew I was already going to take my lumps just here on Deontay Johnson. But I mean, look, 24% targets per route run. He had a 24% target share last season in his healthy games. 31% targets per route run against man. You guys want to know what that is? That's an absolute freaking alpha. This dude can play outside. He can play inside. He can beat press man. He can beat it all. 3.19 yards per route run last year versus man coverage. He's also good against zone. He can do it all. He's just not put it all together in the last couple of seasons. 3 years ago, he did put it all together, Marcus, and he gave us a top 8 fantasy finish. He still grades out as being a guy that has all those underlying characteristics. You mentioned it. Talked about it last week that the Panthers are probably the most improved offense in the NFL, not only for adding Deontay Johnson and Xavier Legette, but because they also added 2 guards, and getting sacked was a major problem last year for Bryce Young, 62 times, second behind only Sam Howell, which was a running joke. Like, every fantasy analyst last year for like the first 8 weeks was just updating. Oh my God, Sam Howell's on track for 1,000 sacks. Well, Bryce Young was right behind him. And so they did some things to address the interior of the offense to help with that interior pressure. So I think that Bryce Young takes a solid step forward. Not saying he's going to be a superstar this year, but I saw Bryce Young play at Alabama, and I don't think he's going to be a complete bust. I think Deontay Johnson is going to find that magic with him. I think Bryce Young will be the best quarterback. I'm going to go on the record. It's going to be the best quarterback that Deontay Johnson has played with at this point in his career. It's not necessarily saying a lot. Ben was pretty much done by the time Deontay got there, Ben Roethlisberger. So I'm looking forward to Bryce Young taking a step forward.
Yeah, me too. I'm very excited about that. For me, I love you can split this up. It's either Aaron Jones or David Montgomery. They're sort of going back to back at the end of this 7th round because there are avenues to them having a lot of touchdown upside. And I know we had concerns about the Vikings offense. We just talked about it with Jordan Addison, but I don't really worry about Ty Chandler taking a whole lot of opportunity away from Aaron Jones, especially when they get down near the end zone. I know I love Jahmyr Gibbs early in drafts, but I think even with David Montgomery there, he's still going to get his touches. He'll get his occasional targets. And he's another guy. When they get close, they're probably going to turn to him to try to punch the ball in across the goal line. So where they're going, especially if I don't really go running back early in drafts, those are a couple of names I'm finding and getting really feeling really comfortable with down near the end, or actually to the start of the 7th round, but still pretty comfortable with drafting either one of those guys in their respective offenses. Who don't you like in this round?
I didn't write one here because there's not someone in this round that I'm scared of at cost. Like I like getting exposure to all these players. I don't have a ton of stands outside of Deontay Johnson, but look, Kyler Murray, elite dual threat quarterback that could still be the QB1 overall. You can get him in this round. Joe Burrow, who just because he had the wrist injury, this guy was a round 4 pick last year. You still got T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. You add Jermaine Burton, like that's a good pick. Jackson Smith-Njigba, a former first-round pick who we know had a good profile coming out. It was his rookie season, everything we wanted. No, it wasn't. DeAndre Hopkins, he's older, but he earned targets like a maniac last year. So a lot of these guys, like when I look at them, and we'll talk about the guy you have that you're avoiding, but even I could see an argument for them just if you're saying, I kind of want to get a few shares of this player because what if the news breaks the other way and then his price suddenly shoots up the board, which leads me, Marcus, like, let's talk about the guy that you don't like.
Yeah, I mean, it's Rashee Rice. And I would say this because whenever I say this to somebody, they're like, oh, yeah, the off-field stuff. And I'm like, nah, it's really not that because as that goes along, and look, if you don't follow Drew Davenport, you should because he's very good at sort of giving you legal updates about that. But for me, it's just about the fact that so much of his opportunity last year was schemed up. I mean, they really tried to manufacture touches for him as much as possible. Now you have Hollywood Brown. Now you have Xavier Worthy. You still have Travis Kelce, guys who can find ways to get open on their own. Will Andy Reid be as invested in trying to manufacture those touches for Rashee Rice? And so that is my biggest concern. I don't think he completely disappears from the offense. I think he was too good for them last year to completely vanish from the offense. But I do think we may see significantly less of him just because Patrick Mahomes has made it clear they want to be more vertical. They weren't vertical last year because they kind of couldn't be. I mean, besides MVS, and he's MVS. I mean, we sort of know how that goes. They didn't really have those guys who could do that. Now they do, and I just worry that Rice is going to take a big step back because of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really smart point by you. 5.2 average depth of target, by far the lowest. If we're looking at my ranks, which I've got Rashee Rice as a low end wide receiver 3, high end wide receiver 4 right now. There's no other receiver lower than that. Okay, like Deebo Samuel's at 7.3, and if you wanted to look for a comp where we're talking about scheming things up, probably Deebo. But guys, I know Rashee what he did last year, but he's not Deebo Samuel. He's not that dude after the catch. He might be able to do it for a year. Can he do it every year? I think that you got to lean towards no. 32.4 air yards per game, 15% air yard share. Those are also the lowest. Only 6% of his targets, Marcus. You just talked about wanting to go more vertical. Only 6% of his targets came 20 plus yards down the field. That also is the lowest out of every wide receiver. So he was very dependent on a certain aspect of his game. Behind the line of scrimmage, 28% of his targets. That was also the most. 27% to Zay Flowers, the other guy that was close. Deebo was at 25%. So I think you're 100% right. It's definitely about a scheme thing. And then if you look at the fact that they've added other weapons that they could be scheming things up for as well. My question to you would be, if you knew Rashee Rice, if the legal stuff worked out in a way where it's getting kicked down the road and he may not even see any legal action this year and we find that out, then where would you be willing to take Rashee Rice? Because obviously he's going to move up this board, but where would that put him for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we know that, he probably moves up a round or so. So this is a question I'll ask you. Rashee Rice or Jordan Addison? I think I know where you're going there.
Yeah, I go Rashee Rice there. Yeah. I still feel like there's going to be more upside. And I think if you're thinking he moves up a round, you won't have to worry about it. I think if we found out tomorrow that Rashee Rice has 0 legal issues, he would move to being the first chief receiver, the first chief skill position off the board. I think he would immediately move ahead of Kelce. I bet he would move all the way up into round probably 3, maybe even higher. I mean, he was going as a late round 2 pick earlier in the year, so I think he could get back to that. So I don't think you would have to worry about taking him.
Yeah, I don't think I think he'd be off my board for sure at that point. Over to round 8, we like the same guy. There are a few guys I kind of like, but there was one that stood out more than the rest. Jonathon Brooks. I know we've talked about him a lot. We keep talking about this Panthers offense and the way they've improved, but Jonathon Brooks is in a good spot. And Dwain, I mean, if we're drafting with the expectation or the hope that some of these guys really start to come alive later in the season, Jonathon Brooks really feels like the prime candidate for something like that.
Yeah, and Google Sheets for the last time. I know how to spell Jonathon Brooks. Quit freaking trying to correct me, man. Stop. You and Grammarly are going to have to chill. But yeah, look, Brooks is just a guy that if you've heard the way we've been talking about a lot of this overall, we like getting an elite tight end. We like getting an elite quarterback early. We like pounding these wide receivers. We talked about some running backs in round 1 that we like, but then you hadn't heard us talk about a lot of running backs. We've laid off of them. In fact, they've been more the names that we've talked about avoiding up until now. So a lot of my drafts, Marcus, at this point, I've got 3 or 4 wide receivers. I've got at least one of my elite quarterback or tight end. Quite often, both of them already on my roster. So what's the thing I'm missing? Upside at running back. And it's hard for me to turn past Jonathon Brooks. I think the other name you can throw into this conversation is also Jaylen Warren. If suddenly the 70% of the work in the Steelers offense went to Jaylen Warren, he would be the same kind of player. So Warren and Jonathon Brooks are the two names that I just get like the most nervous about missing on when I build my teams out this way. They're the ones I'm kind of just sitting there going, come on, Jonathon Brooks or Jaylen Warren, Jonathon Brooks or Jaylen Warren, Jonathon Brooks. I'm like literally like chanting this. My wife's like, what's wrong with you? Who are these people? So yeah, I'm with you. Great in the supermodel, just below the really top elite prospects. But we're talking about a guy that graded out in a bucket market, Marcus, where over 70% of the prospects posted a top 24 finish in their first 2 seasons. Maybe it takes him a little longer because he's coming off the ACL, but I do think by the end of this year, you could be looking at, oh my God, I get to plug Jonathon Brooks into my lineup with all these other loaded weapons that I drafted early. This is just not even fair. How are my league mates going to have any chance of competing with me? I think Jonathon Brooks could end up being worth that kind of value come week 9, 10, 11, 12 as the season progresses.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned Jaylen Warren alongside of him too, because he's another guy that I really have been a fan of. It's not to say I'm not drafting Najee Harris, but given the choice between Najee and Jaylen Warren, I'm probably going to side more with Warren there. So I definitely enjoy having him. But Jonathon Brooks, when healthy, when ready to go, he slides in as the number 1 running back there in Carolina, ahead of Chuba Hubbard, certainly ahead of Miles Sanders, and hopefully he is as close to full speed as he could possibly be by the time we get late into the season and really starting to really come on at that point in the year. We talked a little bit about Jameson Williams. I sort of know your feelings about him, but for folks who maybe are uninitiated, expand why you're not really digging Jameson Williams in round 8.
Yeah, and I'm going to say this, guys. It's fine to click on him here. It's fine. And I do mix him in, but I'm not going out of my way to add Jameson Williams at this point. I mean, we're going into year 3. I know that he doesn't have a huge body of work, so that could be the counter argument to everything I'm about to say. But a 17% targets per route run last year, 21% versus man, 18% versus zone. This is a guy that was really used just more as a deep threat. I don't see that changing. I hear people talking about, well, maybe the route tree opens up. Maybe it does, but the challenge is you've already got guys that attack those areas of the field really well for the Lions. Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to be underneath and intermediate. Where's Laporta going to be? Same area. Where's Jahmyr Gibbs going to be? Kind of the same area, but more underneath. So I feel like JMO, to make the offense all work, to create space for those guys, they're probably going to keep using him on this vertical route tree. And I just think there's not a ton to go around, and he just hasn't shown anything yet. He's shown he can still be an explosive playmaker. We saw some end arounds, some things like that. I do think he can get loose with his speed deep down the field, but how often is that going to translate? I think that's a challenge. Again, not a terrible draft pick, Marcus, where you're getting him, but I couldn't just keep on every round saying, oh, I love everybody in this round. I do draft some Jameson Williams, but I'm pretty particular about the teams where I do it.
Yeah, and that's sort of how I feel about Courtland Sutton too. Is that like at this spot, it's not the worst pick, but I don't know. I'm not excited about the Broncos offense. I mean, Sutton was great because he had the huge touchdown upside last year, but that seems hard for him to replicate, especially when you look at the quarterbacks that they've got, right? I mean, hopefully Bo Nix blossoms into something, but I think there's reason to be concerned there. If he somehow goes down or just loses the job weirdly in camp, I mean, you're talking about Jarrett Stidham or Zach Wilson. We sort of know how that's going to go. So that to me makes me very concerned about a guy like Courtland Sutton. Again, if you've already sort of built your roster and you're just looking at him maybe to add depth as a guy that can kind of fill out that wide receiver spot, I guess I'm okay with that. But generally speaking, I'm not fired up about Courtland Sutton.
And I'm with you. I don't get much Sutton either. But again, this is like running back alley. We talked about tight end and quarterback alley earlier, being basically rounds 4 and 5. I've typically built my teams in a way where I can try to take advantage of the fact that you can get DeAndre Swift, Najee Harris, Jonathon Brooks, Jaylen Warren, Zach Moss, James Conner, Tony Pollard, Raheem Mostert, all in this range. I just think it makes more sense to build out your team in a way where you're clicking on your running back 2 or your running back 3 in this range rather than wide receiver. Now the drafts where I happened to build it a little different, maybe I took a couple of running backs in the first 6 rounds. Those are the ones where I'll be like, fine, I'll take a JMO. I'll take a Cortland Sutton, knowing that I need strength in numbers. I'm gonna have to turn around and pile on a bunch of guys, and I know that this is just the range of the draft where they go. So I'll click on their names, and then I'll circle back around and get some other guys. But in a vacuum, man, I like Tyler Lockett over Cortland Sutton and Jamison Williams, and you're getting him in the next round.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% on that for sure. Round 9, we're close to the end of our 10-round recap here, or analysis, I should say. You got a quarterback. You got a rookie quarterback. You don't have the rookie quarterback that maybe a lot of people would think you have. Although you have the rookie quarterback that I would certainly take in this situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's Jaden Daniels. He just matches the profile that we want. He's going to come out and probably get 18 to 20% of the design rushing attempts. He's going to probably post a scramble rate between 8 and 11%. That's elite. Like, you guys have seen it. You've seen it. You've seen what Justin Fields did, even though he struggled as a passer many times. So even if Jaden Daniels comes out and he's not pro ready, he's going to be a top 10 fantasy quarterback this season on his rushing prowess alone, on a per game basis, right? He might get hurt. There could be other things that happen. You see all these funny clips of people just, showing, somebody getting clothesline and saying, hey, this is basically Jaden Daniels running, not understanding how to get away, from the big hits. So that's a little bit of a concern, especially at his size. But, I don't pretend to be able to predict injuries. And so it's already all priced in here. So, yeah, you get Jaden Daniels. You get potentially, what you're getting with an Anthony Richardson multiple rounds later. You're getting what you potentially are getting with a Kyler Murray 2 rounds later. And he's the last of his kind. Again, so you look at it and you're like, what can I not get later in the draft? Jaden Daniels is it if you want a true elite dual threat option that has the starting job. Yeah, you could say Justin Fields, but we don't know how long it'll take for him to get on the field. And, I mean, there is a chance he doesn't get on the field. So Jaden Daniels is really that last name. So I absolutely love clicking on his name. If I didn't get an elite quarterback in the early rounds, I'm usually reserving a pick for Jaden Daniels. And sometimes I don't even wait, Marcus. Sometimes in that round before, I'll just go ahead and take Jaden Daniels and then see which one of those running backs falls back to me.
Yeah, and some of the quarterbacks you mentioned Justin Fields, Anthony Richardson. I mean, Daniels has that rushing upside, and I think right now he's maybe more of a polished passer than some of those guys were too, especially.
Yeah, if he hits his upside as a passer too, well then, I mean, you could have an RG3 rookie type season.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I like Trey Benson in this spot. You mentioned James Conner the round before. I do like James Conner. I also like Trey Benson, not on the same team, but I do like him just because, look, I see a path where Benson ends up getting a good solid workload. I think he's good enough on his own to maybe earn some work to begin with, but we know the history of James Conner. It's that somewhere along the way, he's going to miss a handful of games, in which case Benson's going to slide in there and get those opportunities. And if we are looking for guys who could potentially open up and get more chances later in the season, Benson, again, sort of fits that profile. Maybe not to the degree of a Jonathon Brooks in Carolina, but certainly a guy that I think the Cardinals can start to lean on later in the year, especially if he can catch the football, if he can get some rushing attempts as well. Love Trey Benson in this spot in the 9th round. We've talked about the Packers wide receivers. That room is really, really crowded. And have you identified Romeo Doubs as kind of the odd man out in that group?
Yeah, I just don't click on him. And maybe I'm wrong, but man, like I've seen him now for multiple years, and there's not anything in his underlying talent profile that really flashes in a big way. His target share, 17%, targets per route run, 18%, targets per route run against man coverage, 12%. That's absolutely putrid. 0.33 yards per route run against man coverage last year. So I just think there's a lot of competition, and there's a lot of paths for Doubs to lose routes here. Like, I could see them wanting to use more Jaden Reed on the outside just because he came through with so many explosive plays. We've got Dontavian Wicks hanging in the wings. And honestly, if you look at Christian Watson, he's just been the better player, and it's not close. Like, Christian Watson's been the better player. Now, Watson could be injured. Maybe the hamstring thing, I know he's working on figuring out how to like balance those two things out. It's just the wildest report I've ever seen. Like, basically one leg being 80% stronger than the other. Like, I mean, maybe I need to go get tested. Maybe one of my legs is stronger than the other. I just find that 80% seems really drastic, but I think he needs an injury. And I think that he could just be challenged for playing time. And even if he does stay out there, when the other guys are all healthy, Doubs is often the forgotten guy. Now, again, it's not expensive. He's not super expensive, but I think the bigger takeaway here, Marcus, is This is why you don't want to be staring down wide receivers that you're trying to depend on at this point. Dobbs is a guy I'll take if I just took Jordan Love in the round before. I'm like, okay, fine, I'll stack it. Like it makes sense at that point for me to stack on some Packers wide receivers. But if I don't have Jordan Love on my team, or maybe I don't have a couple of Minnesota guys, which I almost never do, because that's going to be their game in week 17 if you're trying to correlate for that final game. Like, there's just not that I don't get a lot of Dobbs exposure. It's hard for me to get excited. His price isn't terrible, but some of these guys are just, I get to their name, I'm like, I just go past it every time. And that's what happens to Dobbs. And I already mentioned Tyler Lockett. He goes in this round. He was my runner-up to Jaden Daniels. Mm-hmm. Tyler Lockett, you could make an argument, should be going as high as Christian Watson, and you're getting him at pick 100. Yeah, he's going to be 32 years old this year. But Tyler Lockett, really? We're so sure that Tyler Lockett should be pick 100, and DK Metcalf is coming off the board as pick 31? Right. 70 picks difference? We're really that certain? There's no way, man. There's a chance Tyler Lockett scores more fantasy points than DK Metcalf. Yeah, Metcalf's the bet we're going to make, but 70 picks? That's a lot.
No, absolutely. And I've been a self-professed Tyler Lockett stan for a number of years now. So I'm equally as confused by that as you. Plus, look, people like to make fun of all the videos of him sliding down early. Like, okay, sure, but also that means he's not taking big hits. He's keeping himself healthy, and he's in decent shape theoretically for the season. Guy I don't love in this round is Brock Bowers. And again, this is not talent. This is situational. There's just so many other guys, I think, right now ahead of him in terms of targets in that offense. You've got Devontae Adams, you've got Jacoby Myers. We'll see whether or not they split the opportunities with Bowers and Michael Mayer in that offense. On top of it, you are counting on Gardner Minshew to try and feed all these guys in this offense, which is something I just don't have confidence in. Look, you can get David Njoku a couple picks ahead of that. After that, you still have Dallas Goedert, Dalton Schultz. I don't know if Cole Kmet is really that option because there's 3 wide receivers there in Chicago, but there are other tight end options around that spot that I feel a lot more confident in than Brock Bowers getting a decent target share to sort of fulfill what you're looking for, even at that ADP in round 9. I love the talent. I just can't deal with it.
Yeah, I've been warming up to Bowers as he's fallen. I was pretty much out on him. He's kind of in that range now where if I don't have a tight end and he's sitting there on the board around ADP, or if he's anywhere after it, I've been clicking on him, and that's how I'm getting my exposure. But I'm not going out of my way, to get Brock Bowers there. But I will say, once you get to rounds 9 and 10, you're kind of at a spot where you're looking at your roster construction and you're like, where do I need reinforcements? Like, I've got to do it right now. And so if you passed on all the elite tight ends, like, I don't mind mixing in Bowers there, because you can just say, hey, a bet on talent in round 9 is still probably an okay bet, even with all the other potential warts. But I'm with you. I'm not going out of my way to get Brock Bowers. And like round 10, similar, but again, I feel like it's a sweet spot, Marcus, for running backs. And when you just look at the way these boards are stacking out, it makes so much sense to take your receivers and other positions early and wait, because Tajay Spears is a guy, man, that I just absolutely love. We've heard it repeated over and over by the coaching staff that they see him and Tony Pollard as interchangeable. They can both play passing downs. They both give you explosive upside in the run game, and they see them as being able to do everything. There's a real chance that this is a true 1A, 1B, or a 1B, 1B, where they're almost equal in work, and you're getting Tajay Spears a couple of rounds later. He's the younger player. You look at his explosive rush rate last season, 13% of his carries went for 10 plus yards, only 9.5% is the league average. Missed tackles forced per attempt, 26% versus the league average of 17%. And it's that passing game work, Marcus, 14% target share last year, targets per route run of 22%. That's the stuff dreams are made of. Somehow Tony Pollard goes down and he finds himself as the only back playing in this offense, or somehow Tony Pollard, maybe it wasn't just injury related and looks zapped of all of his explosiveness, and it somehow works out where Tajay Spears ends up getting more work than Tony Pollard. I think out of the gate, you should expect Pollard to lead the way because they paid him and they brought him in for a reason. But that doesn't mean that will stay the case all year. Injuries can interrupt, performance can interrupt that. And if Tajay Spears is still doing his thing, I just feel like, look, he could be in an equal workload, or it could suddenly turn to where he's getting a little bit more and you're getting him a couple rounds later than Tony Pollard. So I just love getting Tajay Spears. I think he's a great running back 3 type pick for your team.
100%. No, I love Tyjae Spears. I mean, I've said before, I liked him last year, even with Derrick Henry there to kind of get some sort of work. And now a real opportunity for him to get in there and get some opportunities, even with Tony Pollard there. Similar skill sets, but one going well after the other. I'm a huge fan of that. I like Rashid Shaheed here, right? And this is one of those, you always talk about those guys who are better in best ball. Well, here we are. At this point in the draft, on a team where Chris Olave is going to be the main target. Sure, Alvin Kamara is going to get a lot of them, but after that, there are some chances that can be had. And Shaheed is one of those guys who, if you had to deal with him in a redraft, a managed redraft league, he would be an absolute headache and you'd be pulling your hair out. But here, where you don't have to worry about it, it will sort of take care of itself. I do like the opportunities to take Shaheed. I mean, Spears is probably the guy that I like the most in that round, but if it's not him, Shaheed's a guy that I feel pretty comfortable falling back on and just being able to kind of take chances with what may come in the New Orleans offense. We know who Derek Carr is at this point. We're not expecting anything big from him, but that doesn't mean that
he's been a 4,000-yard passer. Like he can support a couple of weapons. Like,
yeah, no, absolutely.
He's done it.
He's not exciting, but no, you're right. He did it before with the Raiders for sure. And so like the idea of him supporting Chris Olave and having Rashid Shaheed have big games, I don't think it's a ridiculous notion at all. So.
Yeah. I think, Khalil Shakir is another name in that round. Mm-hmm. Like, I think there's definitely some things you can do at wide receiver. And again, you're getting to the spot where you're not expecting any of these guys to blow up, but you're like, can they give you some spike weeks in best ball? And we know that Rashid Shaheed has that ability. On the avoid side for me in this round, I'm going to stay with the running back position. It's just Nick Chubb.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to find a scenario in my mind where I feel like I'm really going to feel bad for passing on Nick Chubb, which I hate to say. It's another one of these kind of like a sad moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I love Nick Chubb. I think he's one of the best running backs in the NFL. Like all of his underlying data points tell us that. His production tell us that. So I don't even need to talk about it anymore. You guys all know how good Nick Chubb is. But coming off the injury that he's coming off of, and thinking might not play much at all early in the season, then he's going to have to reacclimate. Then it's going to be, what is he? Is he 80% of what he was before? Is he 70%? I just struggle to want to click on his name in this range. And I'm not saying that I never do it, but usually if I do take Nick Chubb, and I think I have like 2 or 3 shares in 80 drafts, it's when he just falls way past ADP. And that's when I'm like, okay, fine. I'll go ahead and I'll take a share of Nick Chubb here, but I don't ever take him at ADP. I'm just looking at that injury. Even if Marcus, like he's in your lineup, come week 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and he has taken over that Browns backfield, I still just think there's enough of a risk that he just doesn't look anything like he did for another year. And so when I add it all up, it's just not a player that I gravitate to.
No, I'm with you completely. And like you said, it sucks. It's sad because he has been so good. But just everything about this suggests that it's going to be a tough go for him this year. For that reason, I don't think I've drafted him at all. If I have, it hasn't been very often. So it's just really kind of unfortunate. I don't like Devin Singletary here just because I don't really like the Giants offense. And, Singletary is, you talk about spike weeks. And I don't know that the Devin Singletary spike weeks are spiky enough to make it worth even at this ADP. And now you put him in a worse offense than he has been in the past. And there's just very little reason for me to get excited about him at all in any draft. So I look at the name, I see it, and I just sort of go about my business because I'm not really all that interested in Devin Singletary.
I'm with you. Ian's going to scream at us. Like, I think there's a pretty good chance that the volume is coming, but I just worry, like, what is that volume actually going to
be? Right. Yeah, I don't know. I'm willing to hear Ian out, but I don't know if it's going to change my mind a whole lot at any point. So anyway, there you go. That was our first 10 rounds. There's still a couple more rounds to go. If you go over to fantasylife.com, you look up the ADP grid, you can go all the way through, pick 150 and get an idea of who you may like or not like in any particular round. While you are over there, if you haven't already signed up for the newsletter, check out all of our content across multiple spaces, whether it's the fantasy space, the sports betting space. Be sure to check all of that out while you are there. In the meantime, it's a good spot for us to pause for this week. We'll be back with you next week for some more fun and excitement here in this very same space. Shout out to James Lynch. As always, we're putting this thing together. That'll do it for this edition of the Utilization Report Debrief. For Dwain McFarland, I'm Marcus Grant. Enjoy the week, everybody. We'll talk to you again real soon.